Years ago, there were eBay stores. Same principle where people, they would be drop-offs and pickups at that location.
I remember some of those. Yeah.
Yep. And I think briefly Marshall had one downtown. Lind had one in the Caboodle Cafe down there.
That's wild.
Yep.
Lind is an eBay store.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that the guy thought, he got the building cheap but it's too far away.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the direction of where the world is going was the right way. Just the location and logistics weren't right for it.
Yeah.
But Amazon, I mean, that's a monster. I mean, our lives will never be without Amazon now. You know what I mean?
Isn't that true?
Yep.
Well, Matt, welcome. Thank you for coming on A Name for Yourself podcast.
Great to be here.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one just because over the last few months as I've been renting out this space.
Getting to know you.
Yeah, met you, get to know you, and we've had some fun conversations in this room.
Absolutely.
About business and kind of your path and your history. So, yeah, I thought it's always fun to share a cup of coffee. Luckily, you brought your own, so you're in good shape. But I'm going to selfishly make one for myself too here.
Absolutely. I like your rig there.
Yeah. It's I think it's either called a Chemex or a pour over or some kind. I'm not actually cool enough to know the name of it. I just know that it's
how to use it, though.
Cool.
That's the important part. It is cool.
Yeah.
It is cool.
Yeah. So, how would you first define yourself? Because you're property owner. You own other businesses that are more hands-on. Or...
Yeah. I mean, I guess in a basic way, I define myself as more or less a hustler.
Yeah.
So I started from the very bottom and, as a bouncer in the industry way back when, and basically through observation worked my way up and then kind of spread out into all the things I'm doing now, which is, flipping houses and some day trading and things that, I wouldn't have envisioned 20 years ago.
Wild.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and even in the way that I know you is narrow compared to what you just shared, because I know you and maybe a lot of people. I think I made this joke before the podcast, but a lot more people know your name, I think, and probably would recognize you on the street. Because Matt Schnoor is just a name in Marshall.
For many, many years, I was a guy that you would see out at 1 o'clock in the morning. So that narrows your scope of the people that actually lay eyes on you on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
But that's where I made my money originally.
Yeah.
In the business. And so, I closed the bar down 365 days a year.
Yeah.
And that was my life.
And that was in Marshall?
In Marshall. I actually started in Lind, but I started in the business in Marshall, and probably about 1992, 93 era as a bouncer at what was the old corner bar, which was the strip joint. And I happened to have a roommate that worked there, and he had just started, and I went in to go see him, and his manager was there, and I walked in, and he looked at me, and I'm 6'5", 270, and he goes, "Do you want a job?" And that's where it started, and it evolved from there into bartending, waiting tables, eventually becoming the manager. And like I said, through observation, just kind of working my way up.
Yeah. So, and then there was a shift eventually from employee to owner. Starting your own thing.
Right.
Was that something you had a vision for?
Yes.
Early on?
Probably about 2 years before it actually happened. So my business partner, my current business partner, and I started dreaming, if you will, in the 1995-ish area.
Yeah.
And there was some big changes going at the corner bar. They were changing ownership and changing the style of business to a traditional bar. And they sold it, and we were looking to do our own thing, and we would just drive around and look at buildings and dream, and maybe this one would work. From the Key, which is now getting torn down finally out by the airport there, to some of the older buildings downtown. And we had dozens of different ideas on paper that none of them ever came to fruition. But eventually one day the Lindwood opened up, and that was pretty famous spot back in the 80s and 90s for large crowds, street dances, things like that. And they had gone through some ownership changes there too, and we were able to get in there and rent it from them and basically create a learning experience for ourselves on how to run a business. And my observation throughout the years everything that I learned, for better or worse, was wrong.
Yeah.
I was working for people who did things the wrong way, and
Sure.
that was my experience. So
Yeah.
I knew what not to do,
Yeah.
right? And so that's where I started. So
Interesting. And I don't know that a lot of people have experience with having a business partner and a business that takes off, and then however many years later continuing to be business partners.
Right.
How'd you guys meet or find each other and know that it was the right thing?
So I think organically it started just naively and unprepared, and it was just, hey, we're friends, we can trust each other. And I put $7,000 in, he put $7,000 in. I was the managing partner, if you will, so I made all
Sure.
the decisions.
Yeah.
But I didn't have another $7,000.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So it started that simply, and then as we grew, it became he's more of an investor and I'm the operator.
Okay. Yep.
So I take a salary or compensation for the work I do, and then whatever we do profit wise after that we split.
Yeah.
Depending on what we've put into it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. And so now, do you know off the top of your head how many projects, businesses you guys have collaborated on, buildings and businesses? And
Well, the Lindwood, the Woody's Bar in Wood Lake, the Rumors it was originally called, which was the corner bar.
Okay.
We named it the Rock originally. Then we turned it to the Varsity Pub, and that's a whole nother evolution and story there that's interesting, I think. Then we've done the Nickel, the Wilmer Pizza Ranch, the Marshall Pizza Ranch, several home flips that we do on the side. So we'll go in and buy a house at auction, put a little work into it, flip it, and then we each have several rental properties as well. None together right now, other than the Legion, which we bought, in 2020.
yeah, which is where we are right now. Yep.
Correct.
Up in that front room, upstairs. So okay.
So a dozen, easy,
So back up to 2 years before the first anything took off, but you saw something coming. Was this what you saw coming?
No, I don't think, it's odd for me to end up in the business that I ended up in, because I'm the son of an alcoholic. I'm not much of a drinker, and in fact, I quit drinking in 1997 when I opened my first bar, and so it's just an odd way that things turned out.
Yeah.
But it was a desire. My dad was a businessman himself. He owned a gas station. He worked for himself, and I was kind of raised in that entrepreneurial feel, if you will, even though he failed in many ways to protect himself because of his habits.
Yeah. Sure.
So I learned that from it as well, as to avoid those pitfalls, and not and be the dealer, not the user.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that is an interesting circumstance to find yourself in.
And so we were, just like I said, naive. I mean, I just wanted to work for myself.
Yeah.
The goal was never to become wealthy, to never own, 5 ongoing businesses and having 100 employees. Those were never desired goals.
Yeah.
They were just, again, organic and just happened over time. And opportunity lent itself. And then as you become successful with one thing, it gives you an opportunity to maybe do something else. And then so we took those chances, and so far they've worked out.
Yeah. Just kind of one step at a time.
Yeah. Very, very small. I call them baby steps. I mean, I started when I was 27, when I bought my first bar, literally with like no money, right? And then to today, I'm 51 and have, these ongoing things going where I have management at each location, and I don't have a traditional schedule.
Yeah.
I'm kind of fire putter outer, on call all the time, and that's what I do.
Yeah. So when over the years, as new opportunities have come, or something's come up for sale, or an idea, how do you navigate through, if this is something you want to add to the repertoire?
Right. So opportunities arise. I think the most visible one that a lot of people might know about is Sam's Place, which is now Fuzzy's. I could have bought that. I had just had the nickel on my plate, and it was just my first daughter was just born, and it was a steal of a price. And Phyllis is a friend, really a great dear friend of mine, the former owner, and she wanted me to buy it, and it was just like, I got enough on my plate.
Yeah.
And, do I need to own every bar on Main Street? No, no. That was going through my head at the time. And Dan's done a wonderful job with it and been very successful.
Yeah.
And so everything works out the way it should work out, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're married.
I'm married. Yep. Been married for 10 years. Yep. Have an 8-year-old and a soon to be 6-year-old.
Yeah.
So all that came later in life, mostly due to the fact that I was more focused on myself and growing these businesses and making a living, and just kind of got caught up into that routine. And so all those things, at 39 years old, I met my wife, and, everything worked out. And so, I wish all of that stuff I would have let it happen earlier.
Yeah.
Because I really enjoy being a father, and that's the best part of my life. But that's how it worked out.
Yeah. Yeah, it all works out at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that, I imagine you experienced just priorities shift when dynamics change at home. And so do you remember what that was like?
I do. I mean, once there's things more important than yourself, it changes your life and where you need to be and when you need to be there.
Yeah.
And so I now heavily rely on people that I never did before, because I would prefer to be at home or doing things with my family or being available to my family.
Yeah.
And so that does change your day to day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is kind of on a different track, if I could just kind of reposition a little bit, but I don't know where you're at spiritually or anything like that, and we don't even need to go down there. But one thing that's kind of always struck me about you is you're a decently humble guy. I mean, you're very.
Well, I appreciate that.
you're just very comfortable in your own skin, and you've never really come off to me as trying to sell yourself or to kind of show how big you are, how rich you are, or anything like that.
Part of, I believe, my function, my purpose is to mentor people along the way, and I've always been like that.
Yeah.
To where the people that are close to me in my businesses, I want them to be successful. I don't expect them to work for me for their whole career. I want them to move on, do bigger and better things, and use this as a stepping stone. But we come to an agreement that there's a way I do things, and I'm going to show you that way.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that that's the way you have to do it, but I want to give you a template for how it worked for me, right? And so mentoring has been a big part of what I've done over the last 20 years.
Yeah. Did you experience being mentored that shaped you in that way?
No, I had zero mentoring.
Really?
Yeah.
So was it maybe a desire?
Again, going back to it, maybe subconsciously, wishing I had a sounding board, which I did everything off the cuff, and everything I did was trying it for the first time, and I failed a lot, and I learned a lot by those failures. But they're not failures that necessarily need to be replicated by everybody, right?
Yeah.
Chances to take and chances not to take. Like when I first opened up, live music was a big deal in local bars and establishments, and we tried to be a live music place, and we were just getting crushed by ASCAP and BMI and the costs and the cost of the bands, and just weren't making our money back. And at some point we just decided, we're gonna change the name of this bar from The Rock and having music every weekend to the Varsity Pub. We're going to bring in a different food, and we're going to go more of the corporate crowd, go for the Schwannies, the U.S. Bank crowd. And ultimately that paid off in spades. We never would be where we're at today and have these other businesses had that not taken off.
Yeah.
Bringing the Paninos in was probably, instrumental in making us different than everybody else.
Right. Yeah. And I would agree. Even from an outside perspective, that's a very iconic experience.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Yep. It's just something that everybody does burgers and fries, right?
Yeah.
So we're known as that place, and we lose some market share because there are people that are not interested in that, and then we don't have necessarily fare that they may want. But it's been, like you said, it's now iconic, and it is. And Mike Sweetman, my business partner and the guy that leases the kitchen at the pub, has taken it to another level, which was originally started by Nate Wanzak, a friend of mine, and he moved on to other things, and Mike bought him out, and Mike's, like I said, taken it to another level. And the facility and our alcohol business and that food business really feed off of each other really well, and we grew it into a monster, really. To where, I believe that only Applebee's and McDonald's were probably doing more business than us, and people wouldn't know that or recognize that, but it's true. I mean, we were doing. I'm a numbers guy. I'm open to numbers. You know, we were doing, pre-pandemic, $1.7 million a year in revenue out of that little place there. So
that's amazing.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Yeah. So I guess one of my questions is, I see you're driven. I would consider you humble. You got this mark of mentorship or wanting to kind of pour into people. Where do you feel like your, I don't want to call it moral grounding, but just where do you feel like your priorities come from?
Mostly my mom, I think. Yeah.
She kind of was instrumental in shaping.
Yeah, she's a kind of a 60s hippie, civil rights marching. Type of person, and so there was always these standards that were set, about not lying, not cheating, and you don't need that if you can't earn it. Type, those attitudes.
Awesome.
So mostly her.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that's super cool.
But my dad was a self-employed businessman, and that I grew up that way, and he had lots of opportunities that to be super successful that he wasn't able to take because of his own personal problems. But I saw what was available if you do it right. So yeah,
absolutely. So and when you mentioned Mike, who bought out a different person on the Paninos, that's a different business partner than for some of the buildings.
So my main business partner, his name is Kevin Neiman. And we've been doing this together since the fall of '97. So coming up on some pretty big anniversaries here, not too far away. And we played softball together. That's how I met him. And we just hit it off, and we enjoyed talking about business and what could be. And we knew at the time the process. We originally tried to buy at the time the corner bar when it initially went for sale, but neither one of us had any money, and it was just more of a dream, and somebody else ended up buying it. And
was that hard when you felt like, man, this is the spot?
It was really, because the price, it was hard because we knew the price was going to be hard to replicate anywhere else. They sold it for a song, and we just didn't have a song at that time. But ultimately, just 2 years later, we were able to buy it from him as he was going through some personal issues and needed to be out. And it was failing. And it was mid-construction. There was a lot of issues with the building. The roof was bad. I mean, if you walked on the roof, you would fall through it. It was that bad, rotten. And, so the first, I don't know, year or two, probably 2 years that we were in business, I had a system of kiddie pools, 55-gallon drums that were up on the second floor with either hoses or sump pumps discharging out the back door, bunch of plastic on the ceiling to get it to these places, and it was a nightmare. I mean, so at 5 a.m. when it was raining, in my head, I had to get out of bed. I had to go up and make sure that, because otherwise it would leak onto the main floor. Wow. But again, we didn't have any money. We didn't have any credit. We just did, it was just seat of the pants. Classic stuff. Did you feel in the middle of that, were you just terrified? Like, is this going to go? I never was, because I never had these high expectations. I never had a ton of money invested into that at that time, right? And it was just, we had a very pivotal meeting with a bank in town here and I'm sure the person's way gone and it's been so long, but our first ever business meeting, Kevin and I are sitting across from a banker trying to get this loan to start this business. And basically the guy pushing our papers to us and saying, this is never going to work.
Yeah.
You literally said you will never make it there. And that, that's the classic inspiration for anybody who's out to try to prove somebody wrong. And so I don't even remember his name. I do remember the bank. That's not important anymore. There's different people there. But, regardless, I use that. And Kevin probably doesn't even know that because he's not the operations guy. But essentially he was telling me, I don't believe in you.
Yeah.
You can't do this, right? And so, I use that.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's some great fuel.
And then I had a banker. I went to another bank a year or two later. Her name was Jean Kruger, and she was an older lady, and she ran First Independent before it was at its current location. And she just flat out took a chance on me.
Yeah.
And that was huge too.
Wow.
We'll borrow you some money.
Yeah.
Which a guy like me now today walking in would never ever get a loan.
Yeah.
Things are just different now.
Yeah.
Right. Because I had nothing.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And so like when you opportunities like with Sam's Place or with like the corner bar came back around in 2 years, you seeing so much time now in this business, do you kind of hold opportunities a little bit lighter, knowing that a lot of times if it's right, it might come back around?
Well, I don't know. I like to say that my specialty is identifying a failure and being able to fix it. And that's what I did at the corner bar. That's what I did at Woody's bar. That opportunity came to me. A lady, a regular customer of mine who worked there part-time, had come to me and said, Matt, you got to look at this. The city owns it. They don't know what they're doing, but there's business there. And she brought me the numbers in, and I just said to her, I'm just not interested. It's a town of, hundreds of people, and it's the opportunity. There's no high side here, right?
Yeah.
In my head, I'm just trying to. I'm too big for this now. I'm in the big city of Marshall. I left Lind. And she came back to me several months later and said, please just look at this. So I did, and I said, here's some things, and I see in their P&Ls that their cost of doing business is 75%. Well, that means that somebody's taken inventory.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I looked at all of that stuff, and eventually I went in and I presented before their city council a proposal to keep that bar open in that town. And I offered them $10,000 for everything. Yeah. And I was the only person that offered them anything. And they had a discussion, and they said sold. And now I own this bar. And I had a friend who wanted to run a bar. So we went in there and we gutted it with great help from the community. I mean, they were all in. They wanted to keep their bar, and they were coming in, working and tearing down stuff for us, and it was great. It was a real community building deal. And I was there probably. We totally gutted it, put $100,000 into this thing, and it made money from day one.
Wow.
And it allowed that community to have an identity and where people could still meet and those are important things for those small towns. And then eventually I did sell out to my operating partner, and that's when I bought the Nickel.
Okay.
Because I viewed that as a similar opportunity. It had run its course through the previous owner, Darv Eknes, who's a bar legend, not just around here, but in the whole area, in the state of Minnesota.
Okay.
The Wood Nickel was probably the premier bar for 30 years.
Really?
In the region. It was a very busy, hustling place.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And actually, one thing I just thought of too with the Nickel kind of actually has its own little breed of not necessarily paninos, but burgers and fries. The fries are very hard to replicate anywhere else.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And that's more of a Tim thing down, Tim Clausen is the operator down there and my business partner down there. And everybody knows Tim. He's a hustler, and he's a workaholic, and he's made it go and to the point where, the last couple of years we're back in the black, and we've turned it around, and we've doubled the sales from when we bought it, which is monster. And so he's done a hell of a job down there.
Yeah.
So I identify the opportunity. I had the wherewithal to see that, but I can't execute that without these other people who are instrumental in the day-to-day loving and caring that business, you know.
And have you identified these people through similar paths, or have they all kind of come in different relationships?
They do all come in different relationships, but with like Dan Scamp, who's my business partner now at the Pizza Ranch, and he's the GM of the Wilmer and Marshall Pizza Ranch. He's somebody who started working for me essentially as a kid, and has moved his way up into now having equity and part ownership in these businesses, and he's running them now.
That's
amazing. And he's been working with me now 11 years. I have some great people at the pub, and everybody would know Brenna Alquist is our GM, and Suzanne Knott is our bar manager, and they're great. You know, so they do a lot of the things that I used to have to do.
I think if people had a picture of your life, and people that meet you they kind of know it. Just you are sort of like like you said, putting out fires, and you're around. It's on a traditional schedule, but there's this freedom and autonomy to it a little bit.
Yes,
people would be kind of like, that's what I want to do. I like that. If there was someone in that stage of life, whether it was post-college or 27 like you were, that's like, I just want to get started. You said the landscape's just different now.
Sure.
What would you recommend someone like that do?
You know, it's hard because sometimes I'm torn, because I see my personal situation, and I look at it now, and I know that I'm self-employed. I have no complaints. I make a very nice living and have done very well. But at the same time, there's still these continuing hurdles. Like, I pay $37,000 out of pocket for health insurance a year. You know? And as you know, I have a son with disabilities, so it's ultra important that I have health insurance, right? You know, so it's not for everybody,
right?
And although I would highly recommend everybody bet on themselves, right? Like, we've had these discussions, you and I have had these discussions. I do think that, you know, those things that come with working for a corporation, a schedule that is firm, and you know when you work and when you don't work, is easier to manage for most people. It's hard with the autonomy that I have. Sometimes it's hard to manage that for a lot of people, and then things get left by the wayside because you've been given too much freedom, right?
There's a discipline to it.
Yeah,
personal discipline.
Right.
Yeah, people underestimate that.
Yep. So I making this up, but for the first 15 years of my career, I probably worked 362 days a year, you know, in some way, shape, or fashion, right?
Yep.
And then, you know, after getting married, and then there's different poles in your life, and we were able to I started taking the month of January off, and we would go to San Diego and rent a VRBO and get away from here for a while and break up the winter, and that was great. I think my wife really loved it, and the kids loved it, and you know, and then COVID hit, and that changed that as well, and So, but I do encourage people to bet on yourself, and to give it a shot, because you can always then go back to the corporate gig if you've got your educational background behind you or whatever. And you know, I didn't have that necessarily. I was more of a, you know, undisciplined at the time that I started, and I hadn't followed through with a lot of stuff in my life, whether it be relationships and or college. You know, I kind of just was in and out of college and floating around, and I felt like I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know that I didn't need to know what I wanted to do, but I just wasn't completing things. And then once everything is on you, you're forced to complete things or fail, right? You know, so, and I didn't want to let anybody down. Right.
Do you think somebody, if they had $10,000 now, could they do it? Could they not everything that you've done, but starting that first bar? Do you think that could even be done today?
I don't think without the access to other people with assets.
Sure.
I don't think you could just, just your inventory alone would exceed that, and so it's just a different time. And there was so many opportunities, and really I got lucky in the fact that the business that I ended up buying, which was again the former Corner Bar, which was a strip joint, is that there was such a negative feel, and they didn't take care of the building. It really looked terrible, and there was such a negative feel to that whole property that traditional business people or investors weren't interested in it, or else they would have swooped it up. Because honest to God, I paid $148,000 for that. You know, most people pay $100,000 more for their house, right? And so I stole it, but it was a situation where it was just not a desirable thing, and I was really out so many people, and he's never going to make it. They can't make it there. It's it's gross, right? But they didn't know my desire to want to do things the right way.
Sure.
And we, starting from day one, I mean, we didn't allow our underage workers to drink. We walk our ladies that work for us, we walk them out to their car after their shift, and we try to do things in a correct manner to make people feel like this is an important job. Because what you get a lot of times in my industry is it's not a real job.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Even though these girls are making per hour more than most people in this town make, it's not a real job. We don't take this seriously. And what are you going to do when you grow up?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Yeah. What I heard when we were talking about is not for everyone. Kind of the requirement of self-discipline and
right.
It reminded me of kind of like in the Bible, there's a verse about counting the cost. Like ahead of time, counting the cost, that there's also a sacrificial side
absolutely
to it. And it's not for everyone.
No.
Just like being in an office 40 hours a week. Some people they'll die.
Right. But you can't give the keys to a bar that has a bunch of young ladies working there, at as much booze as you want, and then you are there till 3 and 4 in the morning, and a lot of people abuse those relationships, abuse those the ability to access things that they can abuse, right? And and so it's hard. A lot of bar owners end up obviously alcoholics, right? Because I get this for free. Well, it's not for free. They don't drop it off for free. But the state you become when you are drunk is giving product away, mistreating staff, just abusing your stature there. And so I, in 97, when I opened my first bar, I just quit drinking.
That's
so
when you made that decision.
Yep. I don't drink in my bar. Like if I was in San Diego and my wife and I went out for dinner, I could have a cocktail. So I'm not a prude in that way.
Yeah.
But I don't drink in Marshall.
Wow.
So.
Yeah. I think that would surprise a lot of people, but from the way you articulate it, such a wise
I'm pretty known for that, because it is such a different, way of doing things than anybody else who's done it in Marshall. They're all more of the partier type person, and I took this as a serious business, and right,
Well, even and because you were 27.
27.
That's a wild age to have the wherewithal to decide then. You know what I mean? Like that's a mature decision.
A lot of that again comes back from my childhood and my dad probably ruining his opportunities to expand and to be more successful because of the alcohol. So I had that advantage, if you will. Although it was a disadvantage at the time, it became an advantage. Right?
With what you did with it.
Yep.
Is there anything as you kind of look back on your career now that you probably plenty of things, but things that you wish you would have learned right away that just maybe not they're necessarily painful lessons, but could be helpful for someone else kind of earlier on in their career to hear that now?
Nothing that really sticks out other than, being immersed in the day-to-day and the minute-to-minute stuff is so important. And knowing my mom gave me some advice when I first opened, and she said, make sure that you know everything that your employees know. So, you know how to cook the hamburgers, you know how to make the drinks. And when I originally started, I did do everything. In fact,
Yeah.
at the infancy of our varsity pub experience, when we were the Rock, I was on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, I was the only employee. So if you can envision that now, I was the bartender, the waiter, and the cook. And because we were so slow and I couldn't afford to pay anybody else.
Yeah.
So, in July of that year, we did $6,000 in business the entire month.
Yeah.
We routinely do that a day now.
Yeah.
You know, so things have moved. One of the most important decisions I think I made, and I don't know how conscious I was at the time of it, was to get out of the way.
Yeah.
Meaning I can hire better cooks than me. I can
Sure.
hire better people behind the bar than me, allow them to do what they do and allow them to make me money. Right.
Yeah.
And knowing that I'm not the talent, so that happened pretty early on. I would say I was about 30 or 31 when I retired from traditional working in that way and concentrated more on the management and the style and the how we wanted it to feel.
Yeah. Was your mom a business owner as well, or where'd she get that perspective of that you
No,
should know
my
how to do
mom
everything?
my mom actually worked for the she was in the apartment rental business. She worked for Marv and Harv, who were the original owners of the Timberwolves, and they owned massive number of apartment complexes and health clubs, and she worked for them for many years.
Really?
And
Okay.
she's just a very smart person who came up at a time where she did go to college, but she didn't finish, and eventually she had moved to Washington, D.C. and worked for the FBI briefly, clerical stuff, and
Sure.
met my dad who was in the Marines,
Yeah.
and then they moved back to Minnesota. She's just a smart person and never had the opportunity maybe to fulfill her own educational or business, but she's helped my dad through his process, and then has always given me great advice.
Yeah, that's that's advice I wouldn't even think of, but when you hear it, you think, wow,
Sure.
that comes from somewhere. You've seen that. You've seen it in practice and how
Right.
valuable it is to pass that on to someone else.
Well, everybody's probably worked for somebody who they maybe resent or say to themselves, how did they end up where they're at? Because they don't even know what I do or how I do it.
Right.
Right. So.
Yeah.
So I have a common thread with either Dan at the Pizza Ranch, because I worked at Pizza Hut for 6.5 years.
Yeah.
I know the pizza business. Or Tim, I started out as the bouncer and cleaning toilets and doing all that, which I still do, but cleaning doing all that stuff. I started from the bottom. So I've done everything that they do. So we have a commonality that I'm not just some guy who threw some money in and doesn't know anything about what they're doing. Right. So we're in the same club.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I identify with them.
Yeah. Yeah. I bet that was tough for you at that 31, 32, 33 when you began to hand over, being the operational guy.
Right. Yep.
It's kind of like, it's so territorial, I'm sure.
It is, but you come to a point where you only have so many hours in the day, and you can't. There is no more ability to grow if you're stuck in that spot.
Yeah.
For 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day. When are you going to find the time to go out and do these other things, right?
Yeah.
So if I could get away for 4 hours, it's starting that, at that age, to where now, I come and go and have all the ability to mess around with the other stuff that I do, trusting the people that I've left in charge, to honor it as I would do it.
Yeah.
And I've had really good luck with that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. How did you get through that? Because I can somewhat relate when you do something, it's just so important, and you have a way of doing it. And the first time you have to hand that to someone else, you don't want to be overbearing. You don't want to be too loose.
Yep.
Did someone tell you it was time? Did you feel like you knew it was time?
No, I think I recognized that as things started to grow, that I was no longer going to be the guy that could do $1,500, $2,000 in sales behind the bar by myself.
Yeah.
Right. That wasn't my strong suit. Even though I did it because I had to.
Yeah.
I had the advantage or disadvantage, if you will, of I was single. I didn't have a lot of financial needs, so I could do a lot of stuff without paying myself along the way, which is a great advantage. I lived a really lean life for that period of time because I could, and pour that back into the business and not stress the business out, if you will, right? But I think everybody knows when they run into somebody who's better than them, and that's a good trait to have, to know that. Why would I do this when I've got Suzanne, who's the best bartender in the region?
Yeah.
I'm going to use that asset and I'm going to get myself out of there. I had a very interesting conversation with one of my former managers, who's now very successful, went back to school. He's an engineer. Jared Lee, works for the city marshal. Well, he was my main man at the pub for several years. And I got him from the Nickel. Before I owned the Nickel, he'd come down and work for me, and became great friends and part of the family. And he actually had said to me, when I kind of turned the reins over to him, is he's a little guy, he weighs 130 pounds, and then he looks at me and he says, well, how do I do what you do? And I said, you just do it in a different way.
Yeah.
You're not. So I carried this maybe an intimidation, authority factor on maybe certain customers at a certain time of the night, that they didn't want to cross any lines there. He didn't have that. So he created his own way to do it, either through conversation or humor or whatever, to get the same result, right? So there's more than one way to do things.
That's some good insight.
Yeah.
And that part of the family comment reminded me to mention too, you are probably the second or third largest employer in Marshall.
Possibly.
I mean, top 5 for sure.
Maybe as an individual. Yeah, for sure. Obviously the university and the institutions, but they're not necessarily owned by a person.
Right.
Probably. Yeah. I think it floats around, and during COVID it changed obviously and stuff, but it can hit around about 100 people.
Yeah. And that's kind of wild because just the nature of the businesses that you're in, and then your sort of heart of mentoring, there's an entire, I would say, group audience of people, just a specific section of Marshall that you're kind of a mentor to, or just
that's one of the cool things as you age and you grow older is that you've touched or impacted a larger and larger group, right? So there's a lot of people that I've had their brothers and sisters worked for me. I've had it where their mothers now have worked for me, and and a lot of that stuff, which is really cool to see over the years, and to the fact that there was a conversation in their house probably that said, well, I worked for Matt when I was in college. Why don't you go down to the and talk to Matt about getting a job, that kind of stuff. So,
and it feels like one of the marks of the way that you do it differently is that you remember those people.
Sure.
That they're not just like part-time employees for a time.
Yeah, and it's not just me. Mike is very much the same way, and so it's just our style. Our style is, I think, different than our competitors, and our needs, what we wanted out of it, were different.
Yeah.
So it's working out.
Yeah. So as we kind of wind down, this might be a difficult question for someone like you that I feel like has a wide gamut of things. What's next? What do you see to come down the pipe?
I think about that pretty much daily now.
Okay.
I after turning 50 and doing this so long, and my family situation being young, and with my son's disabilities, and what I want this next phase of my life to look like, and I really would like, and we've begun the process of bringing some of the people that I have mentored into ownership roles, and eventually becoming full partners, hopefully, and them doing their journey along the way while I wind mine down, if you will,
Yeah.
or my day-to-day commitments to these things. And then what's next, I don't know. I really don't, but I've never known.
Yeah.
See, and that's kind of the fun part of it is
Yeah.
really what comes up next, you know, and something that says in my brain says, yeah, I want to do that, or I want to try that, you know?
Yeah.
So it's not often. People don't come to me often, but they do occasionally and ask, you know, I've had a couple people come to me and say, hey, I'm looking at buying this coffee shop, or I'm looking at buying this diner, or whatever it may be, and then running it by me, which is kind of neat to become that person, you know?
Yeah.
You know, where people go, should I do this?
Yeah. Yeah. Did you ever see yourself in that role?
No, not really. No.
Yeah.
Because again, it was just initially just kind of winging it and self-preservation, and
Yeah.
I'm going to show you, you know,
Right.
You know, so yeah.
Yeah. Now you carry this respect, authority, and experience in this area that, like, well, if Matt
Right.
thinks it's a good opportunity,
Yeah,
that's
sure.
got to be wild to say, wow, yeah, I'd love
it is. It's neat. And
Yeah.
and I think, you know, I didn't come prepared maybe, but I think I've had about 10 people that have worked for me that have went on to own their own businesses and do their own thing, and
Yeah.
which is super cool, and
Yeah.
become uber successful, you know?
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, for anyone that maybe is wanting to start a business, or just anyone in kind of a business journey, because you've seen a lot of different chapters of that journey, from finding partners to
Yep.
handing the reins over from operational things to expanding opportunities. I guess, is there any just one singular piece of advice that you feel like, man, this is something you got to write it down and just take this to the bank on this journey?
I wish there was. I don't think there is.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Fair enough.
I think, you know, the basic is just, you know, believing in yourself, obviously, and that you is, if you're confident that you can do it, that's the biggest thing, right? If you can't just, you know, most people are not going to have my journey, because again, my journey was so unplanned.
Yeah.
Right. You know, where I find more people are better suited for success than I was, because they have a plan. They have a direction that they're ultimately going. And I sometimes I maybe still don't have one.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, no, I don't have any singular thing other than, just believe in yourself and, you know, do something that you know you can do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think you just shared something in there that you might not even know you shared. It's not going to look like what you think.
Absolutely. You know, you're right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And don't get caught up in that. Don't think that it has to look this way to actually get out of it what you need out of it.
Sure.
Right. You know,
Yeah.
because things morph and things, you know, who would ever thought you'd be in the scooter business, right?
Who would?
Right. You know, you never set out to be a scooter guy.
No. Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Hey, thank
for
you.
coming to
Appreciate
sit down. Yeah, this is an awesome conversation. I love just picking your brain and hearing your story.
Thank you.
It's different. It's just got a different hair to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love
Yep,
it. So there's lots of parts I'm going to continue to hear, and we'll have to have you back again.
Well, when the series takes off and we start doing part 2s, we'll sit down again.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks.